Deep ecology, next on Enviro Close-Up.
The root of deep ecology is a sense of interconnectedness of everything, that the world is made up, the universe is made up of this nearly mystical web of relationships, and these relationships have relationships to each other, and everything is interdependent upon each other, and we, as Diane says, as human beings, are as vulnerable or as powerful as every other force within that. And any time you change a relationship, it has a rippling system throughout the entire ecology. And so when you look at deep ecology as a framework for trying to decide how to organize human behavior, how to set up institutions, how do we run our economic systems, if you look at it from a basis that starts with everything is interconnected, that gives you a different way of understanding the impact and the long-term way in which something that you do will play out.
And how do you see the world differently as a deep ecologist?
Well, I've been a lifelong political activist, and I think what's changed for me in a lot of ways is rather than acting out of a place of anger, which I think a lot of us who are activists always have, because there's a lot to be angry about. Personally, I feel angry about bringing a child into a world where he's going to have to deal with ozone holes and cancer and all of the horrible problems that they're going to be handed when it's their time to take over. But I think what's changed for me is an understanding that because everything is interconnected, that the way to make changes is to honor those interconnections and to strengthen them and to point them out and to work within that system. So my personal work, I work a lot on eco-psychology, as Diane said, when talking about the connections, is that we aren't just physically connected to the planet through inhaling and exhaling and digesting and excreting, but we're really interconnected in a very deep psychological way, so that what comes from the system, from the ecology that we live in, affects our psychology, and what comes from our psychology affects the system. So if the earth is sick and ailing and out of balance and disequilibrium, we're going to feel that and we're going to act that way. And if we want to look at change, we have to not just look at the symptoms of that, we have to really recognize that the problem is very deep within ourselves. We have to start changing our beliefs, our culture, our philosophies, our visions, start acknowledging what's generally considered to be the very feminine side of life that Western culture has really denied, a very intuitive, interconnected, experiential way of understanding our world. So I feel like for me it's meant opening up and honoring and enjoying the mystery, the intuition, the visions, not ignoring them, and paying less attention to the hard statistics that generally can be manipulated by anybody who wants to use them.
How practical is deep ecology in an industrial society of cement and of parking lots and of shopping centers? And I mean, like, how practical, Vivian?
I'm going to turn the question around and say, how practical is our current way of living for our future? And I think the answer is it's not. We are simply not going to make it as a culture or as a species if we don't learn to listen to a different kind of rhythm in the world. Right now we listen to the rhythm of machines, and machines are killing us. And I don't mean to sound anti-technological about that, but that we have really lost, the way Diane was talking about it, a sense of belonging to a web of life that we are in community with. And I feel like we have a completely unsustainable world right now. So the question is simply, what is the other way we're going to take? We don't have a choice anymore. I mean, people who are deeply into this work, and systems people like Dana Meadows and others, say we have 20 to 30 years before either the environmental structures fall apart or the economic structures fall apart. And my guess is you can get your odds from Nevada on which way you can bet on which one's going to go first, but they're going to go. And so it's time for us to grow up. I really feel we've been a very immature culture. Time to grow up and to acknowledge with a certain amount of lumps in our throat and knots in our stomach, and admit that the world is scary and that we're spiraling into a disaster, and to start taking responsibility for doing something about it.
What should we do about it?
Well, I think the first thing that we have to do is all admit that we're scared and it's out of control and that this is not going to get us anywhere.
That's the easy part.
It's not the easy
Oh,
part.
no?
Believe it or not,
Really?
it's not. That's the
Okay.
hardest part. When
Oh.
people can move to a sense of awareness of how scary it really is and what's really at stake, and they can open up and they can feel it and be honest about it and let go with it, they find an empowerment to then do something about it.
Okay.
But as long as you stay in denial and you're numb about it, you have no resources to bring to the table. So getting people to just do that is actually the most radical act. Speaking the truth in our times from your heart is the most radical act you can do these days.
Oh.
And then?
And then we need to start taking in whatever area anybody works in, whatever their passion is, whatever their art is, whatever their work is, whatever their endeavor is in life, to begin to look at that from what is the impact that this has on the system, and is that the impact we want to have, and how do we change it? Not to look at where do we dump this waste, and then once we dump it, it's out of view, with worries that you might get caught and fined. But the fact is, once you dump it, it goes down into the water table. That water table goes into rivers. Rivers go into our food. Food comes up and we eat it and it's in the food chain. It evaporates into the air. We need to be very conscious, the way that Native Americans used to speak, well, still speak about, seventh generation, that you look 7 generations ahead before you take a movement to see what's the long-term impact of what you are handing on to future generations. And if each of us, in whatever we did, whether you're a chemical engineer or a teacher or a scientist or whatever, if every one of us came to it with a consciousness in discussion with others in our fields about what is the impact of what we're going to do and how can we do it differently? Is this what we really want? Let's admit how scary it is. Our world would change in the most radical way you can imagine.